Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sukkah. We are up to Perek Mishnah Het. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbaev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, and Leavdi ben Chaim Lachaim for the Refuah Shlema, Bachabat Esther, and Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betor Shachulei Israel. After teaching the law that applied when a festival ended on a Friday or started on a Sunday, the Mishnah discusses what happened when a festival ended on a Thursday or started on a Monday. The Mishnah begins, Haliyot Yom Echad Lafsik Bentayim. If one day separated between Shabbat and Yom Tov, meaning the festival ended on a Thursday or began on a Monday, Mishmar Shezmano Kavua Yanotel Eser Halot. The two Mishmarot scheduled to serve that Shabbat, the outgoing and incoming Mishmarot, would take 10 of the 12 loaves of the Lechem HaPanim. Throughout the year, each Mishmar, each group served for 1 week at a time, starting on Shabbat and ending the next Shabbat. On Shabbat, the outgoing group performed the services of the morning and the incoming group performed the services of the afternoon. Normally, these two groups shared all the 12 loaves of the Lechem HaPanim, but on this occasion, when many other Kohanim were present, they were given only 10 of the 12. V'amitakev notel shtayim, and Kohanim of the other groups who were there in the temple, either because they arrived early before the festival or because they had not left after the festival, would take 2 loaves. When a festival ended on Thursday, although the Kohanim who came to Yerushalayim for the festival could return home on Friday, some would choose to remain until after Shabbat. Similarly, if a festival began on Monday, although the Kohanim could arrive in Yerushalayim on Sunday, some chose to arrive before Shabbat. Now, the laws in all the previous cases, when Yom Tov falls either on Shabbat, next to Shabbat, or a day removed from Shabbat, are exceptions to the rule. The Mishnah now states the standard rule. Ubishar yemot hashana, however, on the Shabbatot of the rest of the year, hanichnas notel shesh vayotze notel shesh. The incoming group would take 6 loaves, and the outgoing group would take 6 loaves. Rabbi Yehuda says, hanichnas notel sheva vayotze notel chamesh. The incoming group would take 7 loaves, and the outgoing group would take 5. The outgoing group opened the gates of the temple in the morning, therefore it would be fitting that they complete the service by closing them at night. Instead, it was the incoming group that closed the gates. Therefore, the incoming group was rewarded with the greater portion of the Lechem HaPanim. And the Rav does tell us, Ven Rechak Rabbi Yehuda, the Halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. After taking its loaves, each group divided them among its Kohanim. This division had to be done in a particular place. The incoming group divided their loaves in the north of the courtyard, which was a more prominent section of the temple where the holiest offerings were slaughtered to display that they had recently arrived and were ready to start their service. And the outgoing group, who had finished their service and were ready to leave, divided their loaves in the south of the courtyard. One of the groups was punished by being deprived of certain privileges, including the right to divide its Lechem HaPanim in the north of the courtyard. Bilga le'olam choleket badarom. The group of Bilga always had to divide its loaves in the south of the courtyard, even when they were the incoming group. V'taba'ata kivua, and their ring, which held the sacrificial animals in place at the time of slaughter, was fastened so they could not use it and had to use the ring of another group. Now, rings were attached to the floor on the northern side of the altar. They resembled a circle with an open section that rotated through a semicircle groove in the floor. When the Kohanim were ready to slaughter an offering, they rotated the ring so that the open section faced upward, placing the animal's neck in the ring, and then rotated again so that the open section was beneath the courtyard's floor, locking the animal's head in place. Each of the 24 groups was assigned its own ring to use during its week of service, except for the group of Bilgad. This is a diagram brought down in note 4 in the article elucidated. The halonah tuma, and their closet in which they stored their knives was sealed shut, so they could not use it and had to use the closet of another group. Now, the commentators explain Bilgah was punished because one of its daughters rebelled against the Torah, the Jewish people, and the temple service. Now, a daughter of the group of Bilgah rejected Judaism and married an officer in the Greek army. When the Greeks invaded the Echal of the temple in the time of the Hanukkah story, she banged her sandal on the altar and shouted, "Wolf, wolf, how long will you consume the money of the Jews by devouring their sacrifices and not protect them in their time of need?" The sages punished the entire group because they reasoned that this woman would not have behaved in this way had she not heard her father disparage the temple service. And they were afraid that if her father had this attitude, he may have had a harmful influence on the Kohanim who served with him. For such is human behavior, the Rav says, as the rabbis teach us, as expressed by the Chachamim, Oy la rasha, oy lishcheno. Woe to the wicked man, and woe to his neighbor. That is in Rabotai of Mishnayot Mesechet Sukkah, Salik Mesechet Sukkah. Vadrachalan, Mazal Tov. We continue now with Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph in Masechet Betzah. Now, the first two chapters of Masechet Betzah record a number of disputes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel concerning Yom Tov. The first dispute pertains to an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Just to give a background before we start the Mishnah, Masechet Betzah deals with the laws of Yom Tov. It defines which melachot are permitted on Yom Tov and which otherwise permitted activities are prohibited by rabbinic decree. And Masechet Betzah, literally egg, takes its name from the first Mishnah, which discusses the law of an egg laid on Yom Tov. Let us begin with Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. Betzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, if an egg was laid on a Yom Tov that fell on Sunday, Bet Shammai omrim te'achel, Bet Shammai say that it may be eaten that day even though the egg became complete and fully developed the day before on Shabbat. Bet Hillel omrim lo te'achel, but Bet Hillel say that it may not be eaten that day because it was prepared for Yom Tov on Shabbat. Bet Hillel learned from a verse that there is a law of hachana, preparation, which requires that the food used on Yom Tov or Shabbat be prepared for the holy day on an ordinary weekday and not on a Shabbat or Yom Tov. Therefore, if an item of food was prepared on Shabbat for a Yom Tov that occurs the following day, Sunday, that item lacks the preparation needed to make it usable that Yom Tov day, and it is therefore prohibited on that Yom Tov. This hachana, this preparing requirement is relevant in the case of an egg, because an egg becomes fully developed within the hen one day before it is laid. Therefore, if an egg is laid on Yom Tov that falls on Sunday, the egg became fully developed or prepared the day before on Shabbat and not on an ordinary weekday. Bet Hillel ruled that the egg is forbidden because it lacks proper hachana. Even though this preparation did not involve any biblically prohibited activity and it happened on its own, nevertheless, since it did not take place on the ordinary weekday, the egg may not be eaten on that Yom Tov. Moreover, Bet Hillel hold that an egg is forbidden not only if it is laid on a Yom Tov that falls on Sunday, but even if it is laid on a Yom Tov that falls on any other weekday, even though there is no problem of hachana. The sages were concerned that if an egg were to be permitted on Yom Tov that falls on any other weekday, people would mistakenly permit it on Sunday as well. They therefore prohibited it on every Yom Tov, no matter what day of the week it falls. Nevertheless, the Mishnah speaks of the main case of this law, which is an egg laid on Sunday. Bet Shammai, on the other hand, do not learn from the verse a hachana requirement and therefore permit an egg that is laid on Yom Tov. The next dispute concerns the Yom Tov of Pesach. On this Yom Tov, a person is biblically forbidden to eat or even to own chametz, dough that is risen, or sourdough, dough that is fermented to the point that it can cause other dough to rise. The Torah states in Sefer Shemot, chapter 13, pasuk 7, "Velo yireh lecha chametz, velo yireh lecha saro b'chol gevulecha." Chametz shall not be seen, and sourdough shall not be seen in all your borders. This verse prohibits owning chametz and sourdough on Pesach. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel disagree about the minimum amount of these substances that a person is forbidden to own on Pesach. Bet Shammai say, so bichzait, the smallest amount of sourdough that the Torah prohibits a person to own on Pesach is an olive's volume, v'chametz bichotevet, and the smallest amount of hametz that the Torah prohibits a person to own on Pesach is a date's volume, which is larger than an olive's volume. Bet Shammai reason that if the prohibited amounts of sourdough and chametz were the same, the Torah would have said chametz should not be seen in all your borders, without adding sourdough. There was no need to mention sourdough because it is simply a stronger form of chametz. Why did the Torah mention sourdough? So to teach that the amount of sourdough one may not own is different from the amount of chametz one may not own. Therefore, since sourdough is stronger than regular chametz, it is prohibited in the smaller amount of an olive's volume, whereas regular chametz is prohibited in the larger amount of a date's volume. Bet Hillel omrim, but Bet Hillel say, Zeh v'zeh bichzayid, this and that, the smallest amounts of sourdough and chametz that the Torah prohibits a person to own on Pesach are both in olive's volume. Bet Hillel hold that the smallest amount of chametz and sourdough the Torah prohibits is derived from the smallest amount of chametz and sourdough one may not eat, which everyone agrees is an olive's volume. Rabbinically, however, it is forbidden to keep even less than olive's volume, but at least in the biblical level. The dispute about chametz, which applies exclusively on Pesach, is included here with the laws that apply to every Yom Tov, because it is one of the three disputes about Yom Tov, two in this Mishnah and one in the next, in which Bet Shammai's ruling is uncharacteristically more lenient than Bet Hillel's. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.